How will you disrupt yourself? How will you disrupt yourself? How will you disrupt yourself?
On today's show,
we do this leadership training where we talk about when you walk into the arena, and the arena doesn't have to be necessarily a post or a book or a talk. It can be a hard conversation. It can be speaking up in a meeting. But when we go in the arena, there's always the season ticket holders, shame, scarcity, comparison. Those are the season ticket holders. Then up high, there's the cheap seats, where those are folks who'll never be brave with their stuff, but will hurl really hurtful stuff at you. Then there's the two most important seats in the arena, which are empathy and self-compassion.
Welcome to the Disrupt Yourself podcast. I'm Whitney Johnson. I think, write, speak, and live all things disruption. Our guest today is Brené Brown. Dr. Brené Brown is a research professor at the University of Houston, where she has spent the past 2 decades studying courage, vulnerability, shame, and empathy. She's the author of 5 #1 New York Times bestsellers: The Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, Braving the Wilderness, and her latest book, Dare to Lead, which is the culmination of a 7-year study on courage and leadership. Brené's TED Talk, The Power of Vulnerability, is one of the top 5 most viewed TED Talks ever, with over 35 million views. And she's the first researcher to have a filmed talk on Netflix. Her Call to Courage special debuted on April 19th, 2019. Brené Brown, we are delighted to have you today, and congratulations on your Netflix special. We watched it and it was fantastic.
Oh, thank you, Whitney. I appreciate it. It's such a weird thing to have out there, but I'm you know the feeling, equal parts vulnerable, brave, scared, excited.
One of the first questions I ask people on the podcast is where people grew up. So most of us know that you grew up in Texas. The question is, where in Texas did you grow up, and what did you want to be when you grew up?
Born in San Antonio and raised in San Antonio and Houston. I either wanted to drive a long haul truck, like an 18-wheeler, because we had CBs in our cars growing up, and like once you got to be 10 or so, you got your own handle and you could do the whole like Breaker 19. So I either wanted to do that, or I wanted to be a Dallas Cowgirl cheerleader, or after Love Boat started, I wanted to be a cruise director.
You wanted to be Julie.
Yeah, Julie on the
cruise director.
For sure.
Okay, so you did not have a plan to become an academic.
No, I don't know who said it, maybe Maya Angelou, you got to be able to see it in order to be it. Like, so what I saw growing up were, long haul drivers, cheerleaders at football games, and television, which was, the Love Boat. We drove up and down 10 a lot because, we lived in Houston, but both of my parents are from San Antonio. So when we weren't living in San Antonio, we were, going to San Antonio every other weekend to visit family. And so, so I spent a lot of time talking on a CB.
So do you have a CB now?
No, but I think about it all the time. I think about like when I pass a trucker, sometimes I'll be like, Breaker 19, what's your 1020? Like, I think about that sometimes.
I think you should totally buy one.
Could you imagine? My kids would be like, Mom, just put it on Waze. I'm like, no, not as cool.
No, not at all. Okay, so when did you decide that you wanted to become an academic?
It was actually the culmination of 2 or 3 junior college teachers that one guy at San Antonio College, and then Seal Durish at Austin Community College. Because, I was on the 12-year college plan, like seriously. Like I graduated from high school when I was 17. I graduated from my undergrad when I was 29. And so I worked a lot, took classes here and there where I could until I got, when I graduated with my bachelor's degree, I went straight in the next year to my master's, then my PhD. But I had these amazing junior college teachers who were like, I remember in San Antonio College, I don't remember the political scandal, but I remember my teacher, he wore a different Hawaiian shirt every day and he jumped up on the desk. And then he was yelling and screaming about a group of politicians who were pissing all over the Constitution. And then Seal Durish got really enraged about something going on in Austin. So she took our whole class down to the legislative session to like observe and make appointments to see our legislators. And I was like, oh my God, I want to be a teacher like this. Yeah. It was
Do they know? Do they know, those two professors? Do they know the impact that you had on them?
I tried to find Seal Durish not too long ago, but I'm going to look again because and it was funny because, I went to UT, which is this amazing university, and I had some great teachers there, for sure. But I also had a lot of TAs, teaching assistants in big rooms. And I just remember it was really the junior college, just a bunch of scrappy people in a classroom at night, working during the day. I think I was bartending and waiting tables I really thought, God, you just changed my life. And could you really have a job where you were talking about what you were passionate about and change someone's life?
Wow. Wow. That's great. And just the power of a teacher, of a professor. That's really wonderful. So that's when you saw what they were doing, you realized, oh, as you said, you could see it, and now you realized you could be it.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. Yeah. And it was a long haul and it was scary, and I had a lot of imposter stuff I had to work through along the way, but that's exactly right.
It's funny that you said a long haul. It made me think of long haul trucking. So
It all comes back.
You got the long haul in there.
I do. I do.
So in one of your books, because I have all four sitting in front of me, you talked about your mother and the gift that she gave your family. And I don't know that she would have described it this way, but she seems to have made a decision to be a transitional figure in your family. Could you talk about the decisions that she made and how that influenced you?
Yeah. I mean, there were just so many decisions that she made, and hard decisions. I think both my mom and my dad came from, very working class. My grandmother was, a beauty operator, or, I think you'd say a stylist now. Her husband drove a forklift at Pearl Brewery in San Antonio. And my parents came from very kind of pretty tough working class backgrounds. My mom came from a lot of alcoholism. She kind of compensated for that by, being the head of the drill team and, the valedictorian and the president of different clubs. But yet still, my grandmother had been divorced twice and was an alcoholic. And so people weren't allowed to come over to her house. And, that was the 1950s. That was like Leave It to Beaver era. And I don't think my mom's house was the Cleavers. So I think in raising us, she and my dad really tried to they were married for 21 years maybe. I feel like every family that turns direction has that person who's kind of the fulcrum up for it, and that fulcrum was on my mom's back. She got into therapy. She made us go. She made us talk about our feelings. She talked about what was vulnerable and hard. Right around maybe the year after my parents' divorce, her only sibling was shot and killed in just a kind of a random act of violence. And we were definitely raised that vulnerability is weakness and for suckers. I mean, that was definitely the messaging growing up. The fifth generation Texan, tough. It was hard because Ronnie was killed, and then my grandmother, who I adored more than anyone in the whole world, I named my daughter after her, Ellen. She quit drinking the week I was born because that was the condition under which she could see me. But she never really got sober or did her work. And so when Ronnie was killed, she just, I don't know, went crazy, I guess. And so it was just this horrible year. And I remember telling my mom at one point saying, I'm just scared. I'm not used to seeing you, weak like this, because she was crying a lot. And I'd never really seen her cry my entire life. And I was 21 at this point. And she said, I'm vulnerable for sure, and sad and scared, but I'm not weak. If I was a weak person, I'd be dead now. And I remember thinking that was the first time I thought there's a difference between vulnerability and weakness. And my mom's the strongest person I know. And so what the hell's going on? Like, what kind of bill of goods have I been sold here on vulnerability? And so, yeah, she's just transformed my life and the lives of my brother and my sisters in meaningful ways. She turned the ship.
That's so beautiful, Brené. It makes me cry. I love what you just said, what she said. I'm vulnerable, but I'm not weak. So powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, she's an amazing person, and still it's so fun to see her now with all of our kids, and she's still you know her Christmas tree topper is like an ACLU gay pride Statue of Liberty. Like she's still no joke, man. Do not mess with the Texas woman like in the Molly Ivins and Richard strain of Texas women.
Wow. So, okay. So I think that leads us to something I wanted to ask you. In the Netflix special, you quoted Daring Greatly. And what I would love for you to do is to read that out loud, and then tell us why that passage had so much significance for you.
Sure. Okay, so this is Teddy Roosevelt. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again, and who, at the best, knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who, at worst, when she fails, at least does so daring greatly. That says it all to me. I found it at such a hard time in my career. I had just done the TEDx Houston talk on vulnerability, and it was like rapidly going viral, and there was a lot of media coverage, and there was so much love and support for the talk, and people were so grateful for, having words to talk about vulnerability and courage and wholeheartedness. But, along with that, as you know, comes like just the trolls and kind of the hatefulness. And so I found it at a really hard time in my life when I needed to be reminded that I was in the arena and that I was trying to be brave with my life and my work, and it's not the critic who counts. And so it's like not hyperbole to say my life changed when I read that quote, because what I was just flooded with this belief that, you know what, 1, I'm going to be in the arena. 2, vulnerability is not weakness. It's showing up when you can't control the outcome, including the trolls on, Twitter. And I'm going to stop taking feedback from people who are not also being brave. And so it was really my life before that moment and my life after that moment.
So interesting to me, because you look at it, and I think so many people, except for the trolls, would have looked at this and said, okay, your talk just went viral. You've made it, right? You're on the road to making it, whatever making it means. And yet that wasn't the experience that you were having at all. And it's just so interesting to me that I remember you had written a book prior to that called The Gifts of Imperfection.
Mm-hmm.
And yet that gift that you gave to every single person that listened to that talk, your TEDx talk, that gift that you gave came at a very huge price for you.
Yeah, I think when we put our work out in the world and when we're brave in doing that, no matter what the work is, it becomes a very uncomfortable mirror for people who are sitting on their work, holding their work, and not putting themselves out in the world out of fear. And the response is hatred and pain. And we're so much better at causing pain than we are at feeling pain. And so I think that's so much what I experienced. And it was one crappy comment for every, 1,000, not supportive necessarily, but engaged. I disagree with you, but here's why. And I appreciate the conversation. Like, I don't mean you have to blindly accept what people put out in the world, or I want people to do that with my work. I think my work gets better when I'm challenged, and I love debate and discourse. I mean, I got into a great debate last night on Twitter about the nature of emotional labor. So, I mean, I love debate, but these were like, you're ugly, I hope you die. Like, these were
ad hominem attacks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I think, unfortunately, I'd be curious what you think. I mean, my sense is this is the new normal.
Well, and people are afraid. And I have to say, I really admire your courage, because I have had I think, a very small taste of the experience that you had. And I remember I had written a piece on LinkedIn about how based on the research, that girls had to be 2.5 times more competent than a man to be judged on equal footing.
I read it. Yes, it was so powerful.
And the trolls just came out. And I remember I felt inside of myself like I was desolated or violated in some way. And I remember going out to my people and I was like, I need you to write comments to shut them down. Because usually when people get out of hand, if I go in and I start talking back, most of them will kind of slink back to their corner. So to your point, I think it does take a tremendous amount of courage. And I'm really grateful that you've been willing to say what people said. Now, I have a question for you on that, because when you're in the arena, there are people in the stands. And like you said, there are some people who are in the cheap seats, but there are also people who are rooting you on. Can you talk a little bit about some of those people in your life?
Yeah, I think, we always talk about, in Dare to Lead, we do this leadership training where we talk about when you walk into the arena, and the arena doesn't have to be necessarily a post or a book or a talk. It can be a hard conversation. It can be speaking up in a meeting. But when we go in the arena, there's always the season ticket holders, shame, scarcity, comparison. Those are the season ticket holders. Then up high, there's the cheap seats, where those are folks who will never be brave with their stuff, but will hurl really hurtful stuff at you. Then there's the two most important seats in the arena, which are empathy and self-compassion. And you have to really train yourself to look for those when you're in a hard moment. Because what you end up wanting to do is you end up looking at the most hurtful folks and trying to hustle for your worthiness for them. And so when I think about empathy and self-compassion, I think about my empathy seat. And, people always like, is that a whole section of people cheering you on? And what we found in the research is you really just need one or two people. And I'm lucky because I have, I think the chief holder of my empathy seat is probably my husband, Steve. And for me, my empathy section is not filled with yes people or you're awesome people. It's filled with people who, don't love me despite my vulnerability and imperfection, but because of it, and are willing to tell me, hey, it felt like you were out of your integrity and you need to circle back and clean that up. Like, these are people who are saying, no, I don't think it was your best.
So the way I describe it is my husband. So I wouldn't have described it. I love how you anthropomorphize these adjectives or ways of being. But I describe it as a truth teller. So my husband's my truth teller.
Yes.
So I know that he loves me no matter what. And I also know I trust him that he will tell me the truth. And when he tells me the truth, I can believe him, but it comes only from love.
Yes.
And I think that's what you're saying, right?
Exactly. I mean, I think, and that's what empathy is. And it's hard. And so I think I have Steve, and I have, my sisters work with me, and my daughter's 20 now, and she's a truth teller with me. And so I've collected a little gang of ragtag, vulnerable, wholehearted people who believe in the work and are trying to live it. And it's just so easy for me, maybe for a lot of us, to dismiss what the people who matter the most say in order and take in with the strangers who really don't have anything valuable to add. Like, it's really hard to keep focused on the right group of people.
Yeah, you know what, Brené, I just had a thought when you said that, because you said, 1,000 comments to one, and, listening to the people who really care about you, that have empathy and compassion. And I was reading this quote from a guy who is an expert in the psychology of killing, and we'll include it in the show notes. But basically he said, paraphrasing, there is nothing more overwhelming or violating than some type of assault from a person, from another human being. And so he's talking about killing, but It's any kind of assault. And so that's why I think we take it so hard, is that it feels like they are assaulting us, like they are really truly trying to kill us dead. So anyway.
No, and it's so crazy because that's how it feels. And what's weird is cognitively, you're like, why am I taking this so seriously? Like, I don't know who this person is, and I don't care about this person, and they don't care about me. But then the other part of your brain is like hardwired to take that as a threat, and so it's so crazy.
I think it's evolutionary.
I think it's
really
evolutionary too.
That's why it's so hard. Okay, so you've got this thing that you say that I love, and I've been using it all the time, is the story I am telling myself.
Yeah.
Where did that come from? How did you come up with that?
Well, it's so important to understand that like I am the gatherer of stories and data. I choose words and I let people know what I have found, but that phrase or some variation, the story I'm telling myself, the story I'm making up, what I'm saying, what I'm making up right now, like that floated around in my data for probably 10 years. Then when I did the research for Rising Strong and we just really said, what do the most resilient research participants that we've interviewed, people who can get up and bounce back after setback, disappointment, failure, what do they share in common? And what they share in common is a process. It's really like a recovery bounce process. And part of that process in every single one of these research participants was some form of the story I'm telling myself. Every one of these research participants, whether they were a special forces, active duty person or a attorney or a teacher or an artist, every one of them had the capacity and awareness to reality check the stories they made up about what was happening. And so it didn't really saturate for the first, 3 books, but then in Rising Strong is when I first started writing about it.
Brené, what do you mean when you say it didn't saturate? What does that mean?
Well, I'm a qualitative researcher. I'm a grounded theory researcher, and we just crossed 400,000 pieces of data. And so what we do is for qualitative data, we, instead of starting with a theory and testing it quantitatively, we start with nothing and build a theory based on people's lived experiences. And we do interviews, focus groups. Sometimes we use secondary data. And we look for patterns and themes that saturate across the data. And so, for example, I couldn't find a definition of vulnerability that made sense with the data and existing in the dictionary that made sense with the data we were seeing. And so I interviewed around it until what started saturating was, vulnerability is an affect or an emotion of uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. So we develop a definition based on people's lived experiences once it's saturated as a full pattern in the data.
Got it. Okay.
Just a geek moment for those of y'all
interested. I love it.
Me too.
So I'm going to give you a hypothetical. So I work with the S-curve of learning framework, and people, you're on a learning curve and then you get to the top and you jump to a new one. So I would love to do a quick little role play of what do you do when you have a person on your team and they've got to the top of the learning curve. It's time for them to do something new, and they're just really reluctant to do it. What would you say if you're the manager who you're trying to get this person to jump? You know that there's all this latent innovative capacity. Their brain, has started. They're not getting dopamine. They're not learning, et cetera. As the leader or the manager, what would you say to them based on your research?
I would say, and if I knew someone really well, let's say it's you and me, I would say, Whitney, and we knew we had the shared language. I'm assuming that we have some shared language about trying to jump for something new.
Right.
I've watched over the last 2 years as you have really mastered the competencies and skills in this role. And I see the mastery because now you're teaching other people how to do it. I think it's time to take on some new challenges. I think you've got the ability to do it. I think you've got the skill and time to do it. And so what I'm wondering is what's getting in the way? What story are you making up about leaving this competency that you've mastered and starting a new one? Tell me what you're thinking.
That's perfect. And then that opens it up.
Yeah, because the thing is, we can never, one of the things that I tell leaders all the time is we can never control. I mean, anyone that's ever managed teams through change knows this. Here's a sentence, Whitney, you can take to the bank. In the absence of data, we make up stories. We are a meaning-making species. It is tied all the way back to the limbic system. We make up stories. Those stories help our brain understand how to protect us, how to take care of us, which is the brain's number one, it's what it's wired for above all else. And so we can't control the stories that people make up, but we can be the kind of leader that offers a space for people to check out those stories. So if we have to let someone go from our organization, we will always have like a story rumble hour where I or somebody will sit in a room available to everyone to check out stories. Tell me what stories you're making out. And, and we'll say, look, we can only share so much. But we want to check the stories. We want you to check your stories out with us.
So you give everyone an opportunity
Everybody.
to come in. Everybody.
That
is brilliant. So that you've had the conversation with the person who's leaving. Then the person who's leaving also has the opportunity to say, here's the story I'm telling myself, so they can check with you. But then everyone else, because that's fascinating, because your point I think you're making is that when you need to let someone go, they're leaving a community. And so the community is having an experience. It's not just the manager's experience. It's not just the person who's leaving. It's a communal experience.
Yes, it's plain systems theory. There's been a change, and a massive change to the system. Everyone in the system's affected by it, and you either address that or the system will self-regulate with a false narrative that will be costly. Performance, to culture, and to people.
Love it. Okay. Next question. So I had a conversation with my daughter. She's a little bit younger than yours. She's 18 and she's a senior in high school. And I said, Miranda, I'm about to talk to Brené. She watched the special too. I'm like, what would you ask her? She said, I'd like to know how we can have a productive conversation around mental health. This is a conversation that's very much on the minds of all of her classmates, et cetera. And she said, kind of paraphrasing, that we talk about, if someone has diabetes or they've broken a leg, we say that's bad. But when we talk about anxiety or depression, even if we don't say it, the subtext is that you are bad. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, just congratulations and like 1,000 like big hearts to the fact that you have raised a daughter who's a senior in high school and asking that question. I think having young people like your daughter asking that question is part of the solution. I think that the main reason we don't have honest conversations around mental health is shame. And it's so interesting that you use that example of diabetes versus, like anxiety, an anxiety disorder, because the difference between shame versus guilt is I did something bad, shame is I am bad. So when when it's a physical injury, I broke something. When it's a mental health issue, I am broken. And so the more we talk about it, like the more we're honest and normalize it, and it has changed so much in the 20 years even that not enough. I'd say we're at the halfway point at least, maybe a third of the way, but it has changed so much since I started the research 20 years ago. But I think we have to normalize it and not use it when we learn something about someone. Like, if you learn that, I can get really overwhelmed and have anxiety, or that, look, let's just take a real, which is true. I've been in recovery. It'll be 23 years.
Yay.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. 23 years, I guess next weekend or so, on the 12th, I think. One of the problems and one of the things that sets us back is I'm brave. I tell my story, and I have a lot of women that say, thank you for talking openly about recovery and being sober, and that's great. But then what happens when someone reduces me to that to explain away a behavior? Well, she's not very much fun. Well, she knows she's sober. Like,
that's hurtful.
Yes. Or, like, God, I really hate that idea Brené shared. We know she has anxiety. When we get
like
reduced.
You're
yes.
bludgeoning people. Yeah.
Yeah. When we get reduced, Harriet Lerner, who's one of my favorite writers, says that no one wants to be defined by their hardest struggle. And so we have to find this really interesting space between owning it and identifying it, but reject being labeled by it and reduced by it.
Do you have any thoughts on how to do that?
Yeah, I think we need people like you and people like me who have some wind at our backs, some success, saying out loud, hi, yes, I'm Brené. I'm an introvert. I can get super overwhelmed and anxious in big groups. I can speak in front of 10,000 people. That's not a big deal. But if I have to go to a party where there's 30, I can pick a fight with my husband and do anything to get out of it because I get really anxious in those social settings. I'm sober. It's been the best part of my life. But, we need people to tell their stories. And we need people to say, if you're in a room and someone says, Whitney, I don't know what happened to her. Maybe she had one of those anxiety things she has sometimes. I need you to say, you know what? That's not my experience of Brené.
Right.
And I'm not comfortable with you using something she shared against her to explain her behavior. Maybe she was pissed off because you were out of line in that meeting.
It's interesting too. And when you just said that, I'm thinking, I teach a group of girls at our church who are 16 and 17 years old. And one of the things that came up the other day is someone talked about depression and anxiety. And I said, well, I struggle with depression. I struggle with anxiety. And I think your point is that we can destigmatize it when we're willing to talk about our own struggles. And I think a couple of the girls were so relieved, like, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not the only person that's struggling with this. And as soon as I start talking about it and you start talking about it, then it does make it easier. And to your point, not then reducing people to that thing that they struggle with.
Yes.
So that's so important.
That we contain multitudes, the Walt Whitman, like I am large, like I am a lot of different things to find my none of them.
Oh, that's so great. Okay. So one of the things that you said, I'm setting you up here. So Get ready.
I'm ready.
You said joy is the most vulnerable of all emotions. So what about your work and your life gives you deep joy?
I've been thinking about that a lot. I was even going to, it's interesting because I'm coming to this really weird career transition place right now. And so one of the things that I talk about in the Gifts of Imperfection that I need to do my research, heal thyself a little bit right now, is a joy list, like what's going on in your life when you're your happiest. And I came across my joy list a couple of weeks ago and realized I wasn't doing almost anything on it. So I'm cooking, practicing photography, I'm editing photos, I'm making family albums. I'm, in what with the big book would call spiritual condition, like I'm praying and meditating. I'm with my family, I'm near water, I'm hiking, like all of those things bring me intense joy.
So when you read the list, you started to make changes, is what you're saying.
I'm definitely making changes. I think it's interesting because I read your work a lot and I take so much wisdom from it, because one of the things, if I look back on the last 3 years, I, like so many people, thought, I think some of these ideas are important. I think they can make the world a better place. How do I scale them? And so I started businesses, and unbelievably, they did really well, and I hated it. Like, I hated it. And we even had investors come and say, we want to help you go further, faster. And what I realized in this last, I don't know, maybe 6 months, is that I'm better, more joyful, and my work is more meaningful when I am slower, closer. And so for me, a big business learning for me was I need to find great partners who are scalers and who are further, faster partners. Netflix is a great example. But the way I spend my days has to be about slower, closer. For me, like when the businesses started taking off, and then it was like, okay, we need to hire an engineering team, and we need to full stack this, and so for me, it's been this really hard transition. And I think it goes back a lot, to be honest with you, Whitney, to your work about the 2.5 times. I think I've spent a lot of my career proving, and I'm at the place now where I'm trying to inhale and ask myself, am I doing this to prove that I can, or because I want to and it brings me joy? And those two things are not the same all the time for me.
For most of us, no.
So now I'm really trying to make sure that when a new project comes along or when a new opportunity comes my way, instead of looking at what it could do for the work and the platform, and, I ask myself, what is it going to look, what are my days going to look like? What are my next 180 days going to look like?
If you say yes.
If I say yes. That's really been a changer for me. Like that's been big.
It sounds to me like this is a new arena moment for you.
Oh my God, it really is. Oh, I hate it. Like, I just want to sit in the stands and have some popcorn and kick back for 6 months or so. It's definitely a new arena for me. I think I need to be intensely and joyfully in my life in order to write about things that are meaningful for people.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does completely.
I was going to totally ask you as you're a scaler and you understand this whole thing. And I was going to ask you, is there any way that could make sense?
It makes complete sense. What you're saying is that you now know you're capable of scaling. You know that the work is scale worthy, if you will.
Yeah.
You know that people want it to scale.
Yes.
But the question you're asking yourself, if I understand correctly, is what do you want your role to be in that?
Yes.
What does that look like for you?
Yes.
And the challenge that you're having because of who you are is, well, you could do it all yourself. And there's some piece of you that wants to prove that you can do it yourself. But then that pulls you back into the trap of, am I worthy? And so you're trying not to be called by the siren song of wanting to be worthy and saying, what actually makes Brené happy? And
that's hard.
It's super ironic, right? Because it's an arena moment, but it's a totally different arena moment because it's you in the arena and there's actually no one in the stands except for you and you're making the decision.
Oh yeah. But let me tell you something. No one occupies those season tickets, the critic seats, like me.
So you're the arena, you're the critic, you've got the cheap seats, you've got the empathy and compassion on your good days.
Yes.
I guess
I think that's all of us. I mean, one of the things about self-compassion that's like my little trigger to help me is, am I talking to myself like I talk to someone I love? Ellen's a year older than Miranda. She's 19 or she'll soon be 20, sophomore in college. And so if I make a mistake or I'm trying to practice some self-care or do what I really love, is that how I would talk to Ellen embarking on something? And 90% of the time the answer is I would never say that to Ellen.
So here's my final question for you.
Okay.
It's 180 days from now.
Mm-hmm.
Now that you're in this moment of transition and you're really battling it out with yourself, what will it look like if you can say, I was brave and I won?
You're literally killing me. God, I keep showing up for the hard stuff and the hard decisions and the hard conversations. And I am not just teaching and writing my work, I'm living my work. And I'm at water polo games and parents' weekend and reading books and working out and fighting the fight in a way that makes me feel spiritually grounded.
You're whole.
I'm whole.
You're whole.
I'm whole. Yeah.
Brené, thank you so much. It was so generous of you to take the time. It's been really fun and a pleasure. Thank you.
This is like the best therapy session ever. Are you kidding me? Thank you.
It's easy to look at someone like Brené and think she's always been at the top of her game. So I thought it was interesting and encouraging that Brené was a bit of a late bloomer academically. She got her bachelor's degree at 29. It's interesting because by the time she got her PhD, she had enough lived experience to know what she wanted. It's encouraging to me, and I hope to any of you who might be feeling like it's too late to go after something that you care about, that it's not. It's never too late. That being said, the price of success is that you end up front and center in the arena, which is a hard place to be. Because the price of putting something into the world that can change lives is the shouts from the people in the cheap seats. This is scary. But if you sit on your work and gifts and don't share them, you risk becoming one of those people in the cheap seats. It's not easy to be brave with your work and with your life, but it's easier to be brave with people like Brené leading the way. Remember, if it's scary and lonely, you're on the right path. One of the biggest gifts of Brené's work has been the phrase, "the story I'm telling myself right now." As she says, in the absence of data, we make up stories. We're a meaning-making species. And I don't know about you, but I tell myself some really great stories in the absence of data. Having that phrase as a tool has made a huge difference for me in the conversations I'm having with family members and with members of my team. It's giving us a safe place to start in having hard conversations. I thought the end of our discussion was especially fascinating. If you find yourself in a situation where scaling your business or scaling your effort has turned into a business or initiative you don't want to run, what can you do differently? Who can you partner with so that what you're building energizes rather than depletes you? Further, faster, and slower, closer are choices. Choices we get to make, choices that you get to make. This is a different kind of arena, the push and pull between trying to prove our worth to the world and what makes us happy. Practical tip. The next time you find yourself in a situation where your emotions are getting the better of you, you're getting triggered, stop, take a breath, and get curious about what is happening. Then ask yourself, what's the story I'm making up right now? Once you're clear on the story, check in with the other characters and say something like, the story I'm telling myself. I think you'll find, like I have, that little phrase has the power to completely change conversations and relationships. Now, for some exciting news. We have 4 signed copies of Brené's most recent book, Dare to Lead, to give away to 4 listeners. To be eligible to win one of the copies, share your favorite takeaway from this episode on Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn. You can share a screenshot from your podcast player or share one of the quotes from my social media feeds with what you learned. Be sure to tag me. I'm @JohnsonWhitney on Twitter and Instagram. We'll then check all the tagged entries and choose winners on May 29th. Thank you again to Brené Brown for being our guest. Thank you to sound engineer Whitney Job, manager, editor Macy Robinson, content contributors Emily Davis and Libby Newman, art director Brandon Jameson, and thank you to you, our listeners. I'm Whitney Johnson, and this is Disrupt Yourself.